I'll get straight to the point. My middle son is a senior in college. He's a good kid, but I'm a little upset right now because he just asked me for money to go on spring break to Hawaii with his friends, which surprised me. While I always want him to be happy, the way he asked for it makes me feel like something is off. His mom has been struggling with mental health issues lately, and having him around would mean a lot. However, he seems more focused on spending time on the beach with his fraternity boys. I don't really blame him for that. I was like that myself when I was his age, and I see a lot of similarities between us. The whole thing made me reminisce about my college days, reminding me of a memory I haven't thought about in a while. My son is the one who introduced me to the site, and he might enjoy the story if he reads it. I attended Wharton in 1985, which I am still very proud of and consider one of the greatest achievements of my life. It was a globally renowned business school, and I took that reputation very seriously. I had a great time but also worked very hard. Many of my classmates were enthusiastic about the Wolf of Wall Street lifestyle, and I tried my best to stay away from it, although in my third year I acted a little impulsively. I dated a Puerto Rican girl named Maria Munez, whom I remember very well. I sometimes imagine how different my life would have been if I had decided to pursue a relationship further, but Maria was one of my favorite people. Instead of going home for spring break like I usually did, Maria convinced me to go to Puerto Rico to meet her family. It was my first time on the island, and I was so keen to impress Maria that I agreed without hesitation. I was pretty nervous about not doing anything wrong, and Maria often jokes about how open-minded her Puerto Rican family is, so she knew they'd heard a lot about me. It turned out that my worries were largely unfounded, as when they met everyone, they really liked me. The bulk of the trip was spent meeting her relatives, but we did have time for some fun. After all, it was spring break. One of the fun things we chose was a hike through El Yunque, which is the only tropical rainforest in the U.S. National Forest System. Maria's mom drove us to one of the most popular trails and dropped us off. Both of us are pretty naughty, so we definitely took the opportunity to enjoy some more rum. Everything was going great until we realized that the trail we were most excited about was closed. I don't remember why. Maybe it was due to flooding or maintenance, but what I do remember is that Maria was upset. I tried to console her and suggested taking one of the other trails in the forest, but she was unwilling to budge and said that the closed trail was like the main trail, and the others couldn't even compare. How one trail could be so much better than the other I couldn't really say, but Maria was adamant, and it would be unwise to risk arguing with her. When I asked her what she wanted to do instead, she suggested we just walk the closed trail. As I said, we were a bit of a rebel, so when she suggested it, I agreed to go all the way, and we decided that a few rules wouldn't stop us. She looked at me, and immediately we were sure that no one else was around. We started up the trail, grinning like idiots at the beginning. It was exactly what we wanted, to feel like we had the whole forest to ourselves, especially since the trail was famous. Imagine being in a world-famous natural spot, but being the only one there. The exclusivity was unbelievable. We walked for quite a while, passing small waterfalls and admiring the beauty of the forest. We had a few drinks, feeling lightheaded and having a great time, I have to admit. Then suddenly Maria screamed and backed away, almost making me fall. I was immediately alert, not knowing what she was afraid of. I looked around frantically until I saw a mongoose in the distance on the trail, which appeared to have been completely decapitated. I told Maria to stay still and approached the body, hoping it was just a stuffed animal or something, but it wasn't. Examining it from a safe distance, I confirmed that its head had been neatly cut off as if by a knife. This was worrying, especially since the body hadn't started to smell, meaning it was fresh. Maria was shaking, and I was shocked too. I tried to reassure her, joking that crimes in the national park were impossible, though I wasn't sure I believed that myself. I put my arm around her and pulled her past the body, trying to block her view. All I could think about was getting some distance between us and the motionless body. We walked in silence for a while. Even though we were far away from the mongoose, the moment had greatly dampened my excitement and ruined the good mood I had had before. I felt bad, but I could tell Maria was even more shocked. She said she wanted to continue on the trail as originally planned, but she clearly didn't want to stay in the forest, and I couldn't blame her. As we walked on, I couldn't help but think about what we had stumbled upon. Not knowing much about hunting laws here, I found it hard to believe that hunting near a hiking trail was legal. Still, it was the only explanation I could think of for why they would leave the mongoose carcass there to rot. Maybe some hunter had taken advantage of the situation to claim the forest for themselves. As we had sensed earlier, we walked another mile or so in an attempt to lift Maria's spirits, but to no avail. Finally, she admitted that she wasn't feeling well and wanted to turn back. I had no objection to going through that place again, though I was scared, mostly because I wasn't sure how it would affect her and just wanted her to feel comfortable. As we turned back, I realized that I was getting closer to where the mongoose had been. I reminded Maria to keep her head down so she wouldn't see, and she did. I braced myself as we rounded the last corner, but the place felt different. The mongoose had been moved, and my heart started to race. I immediately scanned the nearby trees, fearing that someone might be hiding among them. Instead, I noticed something hanging from one of the trees. It was a mongoose hanging from a rope, its legs tied. Pale green liquid was dripping from its body, and it was spinning slowly in the wind. I couldn't help but curse at the sight, causing Maria to open her eyes and let out a blood-curdling scream. I felt pure terror before she could even freeze. I grabbed her wrist and told her to run. We sprinted down the path, trying not to trip over each other. I let her go first and kept looking over my shoulder, half afraid someone was watching. Instead, a piercing scream rang out from somewhere behind us, a woman's scream of terror, as if she were being attacked. Maria's body jerked in mid-stride, and I thought she was going to collapse. She let out a panicked sob and tried to push herself harder, but was out of breath. I held her wrist, almost pulling away as she slowed. We couldn't stop, though my chest was burning. Eventually, we had to keep moving. Maria was nearly exhausted, forcing us to slow down to a brisk walk. I turned around and started walking backwards, keeping an eye on the trail behind me, ready for anything. I was sure that something had snagged the mongoose and caused that scream. Even though I didn't see anything coming towards me, I was still on guard. Finally, the trailhead came into view, and I thought for a moment that we were out of danger. But then I saw someone standing near the barrier. A park ranger with his arms crossed and looking very upset. As soon as we passed the barrier, he started yelling at us for breaking the rules and threatening to kick us out forever. However, when I saw Maria, exhausted and crying, I told him the whole story without leaving out any details. He listened carefully and told us both to follow him. We were taken to a small ranger station near the parking lot where a supervisor was waiting. I had to repeat the story several times as they called the police. Maria still didn't say a word, and eventually her mother came to take us home. I never heard anything from the investigation, and I'm not sure if they ever bothered to investigate further. Maria's family may have gotten some information, but we broke up the following summer and lost touch, so I really don't know. Even though this experience happened a long time ago, it still gives me chills. Last year, spring break was supposed to be just me and my friends Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel camping on a deserted beach in Alabama. No crowds, just stars and waves. Arriving later than planned, we parked in a parking lot near the peaceful beach. There were no other campers, no fishermen, just a vast expanse of white sand that stretched for miles. Isabel, who was familiar with the area, said that sometimes locals fished overnight, but that night, the beach was completely empty. As the sun began to set and it wasn't quite dark yet, we hurried to set up camp. Jackson and I set up camp while my dog Bean, a sand-loving Doberman, played around. After a while, Ariel pointed out a car in the distance and said it had passed twice. I turned to see the old SUV slowly rolling down the narrow road next to the dunes. The road was barely wide enough for one car, with the beach on one side and a line of bushes on the other. The car passed and disappeared down the road, leaving us to set up camp again. As it was getting dark, someone spotted the car coming back and stopping parallel to us this time. The driver's door opened and a man got out and walked toward us. Although I couldn't see his face, he was really tall, which made the girls nervous. Jackson and I told him not to worry too much and stood up to block the man before he got too close to our campsite. Bean stood guard and followed us. As I got closer, I realized his strange gait was making the group even more nervous. He was limping and almost falling over a few times. As we approached, Jackson asked gently, "Is everything okay, buddy?" But he wasted no time, immediately saying, "You're on my property." He hesitated for a moment, perhaps a little drunk. I told him that we thought the beach was public land because it was hard to believe that anyone would own a beach. There was no private signage. After that conversation, the man said nothing more and pulled out a knife, causing Bean to growl in response. The man's body language should have been intimidating, especially with the formidable presence of the Doberman, but he didn't budge. Instead, he ran toward us with the knife raised. Bean immediately lunged at him, striking the man's knife-wielding arm, knocking him to the ground. I yelled as hard as I could to protect Bean from harm, and miraculously, Bean managed to make him drop the knife. The man screamed in pain as Bean bit his arm. I told Bean to let go, and he complied, but he was still cautious. The man writhed and got up and ran back to his car. Jackson and I went back to the girls to tell them what had happened. Then the man's SUV drove away. The girls wanted to pack up and go back to the car, but I was nervous about doing so in the dark, wondering what the man might do next. Isabel was right about him coming back with a weapon. I told Ariel to call the police and report the situation. When they got closer, we went back to the parking lot with our luggage. Bean was still on high alert, which put me at ease. I noticed the headlights on near the car and was relieved when the police came out to take my statement. But then they suddenly pointed out that my tires were slashed, and I was horrified to see that. The police pulled out their guns and demanded to unlock the car. I complied, and luckily it was a false alarm. They kindly helped me change the tire. Luckily, we had Bean with us that night. The man was clearly out of control, and if we hadn't stopped him, the consequences could have been dire. Choosing a remote location for a gathering carries such risks. It was spring break 2023 when Michelle and I, both 22, booked a trip to Miami for the weekend. It was also our first time in the city. We rented an apartment at Full House in Windwood, about 20 minutes by Uber from the beach. We arrived on Thursday and stayed until Monday. Since we landed late on Thursday night, we only stopped by a few bars nearby for a little fun. The next day, we took an Uber to Miami Beach for a long day on the sand. We brought towels from our accommodation and lay on the beach for hours. Several groups of young men approached us, but we politely declined. However, a guy with a charming voice approached me. He introduced himself as Will, and he seemed straightforward and friendly, and to be honest, he was also very handsome. Will asked about my plans for the night and asked for my phone number. Honestly, I gave him my number and he walked down the beach alone. Michelle seemed a little jealous that he was paying me more attention. At the end of the day, after walking around the beach and hitting a few bars, we left Miami Beach because it was a little too busy for us, probably due to spring break. Back at the apartment, we grabbed some snacks and drinks from a nearby store, then relaxed by the pool and listened to music on Michelle's speakers. That night, I texted Will to ask about our plans for the evening. He responded quickly, suggesting that the four of us go out to Windwood. Michelle jokingly asked if Will's friend was cute, but I didn't bother to ask further. We decided to meet Will and his friend at the apartment around 8 p.m. Will's friend Ken was also very good-looking, which surprised Michelle. They brought drinks, and we drank in the courtyard for a while, which was very relaxing. Afterwards, we walked to a nearby bar in Windwood I admit that both Michelle and I were a little tipsy as Will and Ken kept buying drinks. Things started to blur as Michelle and Ken moved to another corner of the bar. I stayed with Will for a while before needing to use the restroom. Before leaving, he asked me what I wanted to drink next, and I asked for a tequila soda. When I came out of the restroom, I was shocked to see that he had 2 drinks in front of him and was hovering as if he was doing something suspicious with them. I tried to get a better view to figure out what was going on. Although I may have been drunk, I was sober enough to feel the need to leave. I walked away without wanting to attract his attention, looking for Michelle across the bar, but she and Ken had disappeared. I hurried away from the bar, calling her several times but never getting a reply. A few texts from Will asking where I had been confused me, but I just ignored them and texted Michelle, trying to figure out what had happened. Finally, in a panic, I said that maybe Will was messing with us and we should stay away from these guys. Back at the Airbnb, I got a text from Michelle asking why I suspected him of being involved with us. I said I was suspicious because he was hanging around my drink. Michelle said he was probably just on the phone. I tried calling again, but she still didn't answer, only texting that she was still with Ken. I told her I was leaving and asked her to meet me at the Airbnb. Michelle said she would be back soon. I unlocked the door myself with the code when I got home. It locked automatically after 10 seconds, as did the back door. I sat there drunk and worried about Michelle, wondering if I was exaggerating, thinking maybe the guy was just on his phone. But the strange thing was that Will never texted or called me back. When I got the text from Michelle asking me to open the back door, I tried calling her but couldn't get through. In a panic, I tried to confirm through the window but couldn't see anyone. Her lack of response made me panic. And when Will appeared outside, a million thoughts ran through my head. Was Michelle trying to hide from Will, too scared to open the door without her confirmation? I decided to call 911. The police arrived quickly and informed me that a blonde friend of mine had been taken to safety. When she showed up in the police car crying and drunk, she explained that her phone had been stolen, lost, and had been wandering the streets for an hour. It turned out the messages were from a scammer. Michelle's phone was later found in the backyard pool. Apparently had been dumped there as soon as the police were called. We had to write a police report with every detail as accurate as possible. The police promised to get the surveillance video from the bar, and we had to notify our Airbnb host to cancel the trip immediately. It was a horrible night that made the rest of our trip pointless. It took a week to hear back from the police, just to confirm the name the guy had used because it didn't match the phone records. The authorities closed the investigation and never provided any updates. It's disappointing that the police don't take cases like this seriously when there's clear evidence. I won't be going back to Miami after this terrifying experience. Honestly, I felt like I might die. My name is Anna and my friend Lena. We had been looking forward to spring break for weeks. As struggling college juniors, we were desperate for a change of pace, but neither of us could afford a fancy trip to Mexico or Hawaii, so we limited ourselves to mainland destinations, preferably not too far away. When we found a cheap Airbnb near historic Charleston, we quickly booked 5 nights, feeling like we were exploring the place. Plus, this was my first spring break since turning 21, so I wouldn't have to worry about someone stealing my fake ID. By night 3, we were well into the rhythm of exploring during the day and hopping between restaurants and bars at night. Lena and I aren't big drinkers, so it was nice to enjoy what the city had to offer in the evening. We stopped by a small seafood restaurant that Lena had found online, with dishes like fried shrimp and hush puppies and sweet tea. The atmosphere was truly a hidden gem, and I was impressed that Lena had chosen something authentic amidst all the touristy options. However, the good feeling didn't last long. As we were having a late lunch, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number that simply said, "Hey." I showed it to Lena to ask if she knew the number, but she didn't. I assumed it was a common scam, but then became suspicious when I saw that the message simply said, "Hey, perhaps it was a wrong number." I texted back, "Who is this?" and went back to eating. As we were laughing, another message popped up from the same number telling me to look outside. This startled me. I looked toward the window near my desk, hoping to see someone waving or teasing me. Maybe a friend from school who happened to be traveling here. But outside was just a normal street. I told Lena that someone was teasing me, and she agreed that it was probably a prank. I laughed, but I was really worried because none of my friends were like that. I started to think that maybe some guy had been flirting with me and was now bored. At first it seemed harmless, but then the next message hit me. It was my name, Anna. It was definitely not a wrong number or a scam. I took a deep breath and showed it to Lena. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten. On our first day in Charleston, Lena and I entered a giveaway at a local coffee shop that required names and phone numbers to win a free meal. I had completely forgotten about it, but when Lena mentioned it, I remembered that this might be why the other person had my number. I told Lena that they might have hers too, so we started to feel a little scared, which made the evening less enjoyable. Then the feeling of being in paradise disappeared when we decided to go to a rooftop bar on the other side of town to relax. It was quite crowded and had a lot of young people, so there was nothing to worry about. After a few drinks, we started to feel comfortable and happy again. But of course, that happiness didn't last long. I got another message from the same number, but this time it was much worse. It said it was a beautiful red coat. A chill ran down my spine because I was wearing a red coat and was actually one of the few people there. The other guests were mostly not wearing red. I looked around frantically but saw nothing out of the ordinary. The place was crowded with people, laughter, and glasses of wine, but no one seemed to notice me, at least not visibly. I showed Lena the message and she said we should leave. We started walking back to the Airbnb with the utmost caution. I kept looking back to make sure no one was following us, and luckily, no one was following us as we went in. We bolted the door and checked every lock, pulled the blinds and locked all the windows, trying to convince ourselves that perhaps we had overreacted. About an hour after returning to our Airbnb, hunger began to set in, but none of us wanted to go out. Instead, we ordered Uber Eats from a random burger joint nearby. I always set it to be delivered at the door because of a bad experience with a delivery driver I don't want to talk about. The estimated wait time was 50 minutes, which seemed like an eternity. To pass the time, we watched some silly reality shows in hopes of distracting ourselves from the anxiety we felt earlier, and it worked. When there was a knock on the door, I looked at my phone and saw a notification from Uber Eats that the driver was on the way, though I was a little confused because Uber Eats usually sends a photo when the food is at the door. I didn't understand why the driver would knock. I looked at Lena and saw that she was equally confused. I stood up, checked the peephole, and sure enough, there was a tall-looking guy in a hoodie holding our bag of food. He looked like a regular Uber driver. I watched for a few minutes, expecting him to put down the food and leave, but he just stood there. After a while, he knocked again and called out an Uber Eats for Anna. I said thank you and asked if I could leave the food outside, but he didn't move. There was a long pause before he said I needed to come out and sign. Something wasn't right. I exchanged a knowing look with Lena, sensing something was very wrong. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911, muttering to me that I wouldn't argue. Thinking back, it probably wasn't the smartest choice to yell at the guy because he started knocking harder, saying over and over that he had other deliveries to make and just needed a quick signature. But I knew that was bullshit. When I didn't respond, he turned the doorknob, and when it didn't budge, he started banging on the door and screaming my name. I really thought he was gonna kick the door open. In the heat of the moment, Lena and I felt like we couldn't fight back if he did, but then we heard sirens in the distance. The banging stopped. The bag of food fell onto the porch and footsteps ran away from the house. The yard became quite chaotic with police shouting and sirens blaring. Lena and I rushed to a window just in time to see two police officers restraining the man in the hoodie a few houses away. We didn't dare go outside, but watched as the police handcuffed him and put him in the back of the car. Later, the police came to question us about the incident. We told them the whole story, including the text message I had miraculously received. One of the patrol officers was only 2 blocks from our Airbnb when Lena called, explaining why they were there so quickly. Luckily, it was a busy place. They took our statements and said they would have more information soon. The investigation confirmed our theory about the coffee shop. He worked there and had been taking pictures of the gift certificates and following us since the afternoon. Maybe because we had written down that we were only visiting for spring break, we were easy targets or something. The police theory was that he had followed us home from the bar, and when the Uber Eats driver showed up, he must have convinced the driver to deliver the food, maybe pretending to be my boyfriend or something. He also had a criminal record, which made the situation worse when dealing with someone with a very violent past. The rest of the trip was pretty bad, and when it was time to leave Charleston, I felt relieved. I still don't know what the man's plan was. Maybe he thought if we opened the door, he'd have a chance to break in and do God knows what. Either way, I tried not to think about what would have happened if Lena hadn't called the police, or if the police hadn't arrived in time.